I will tell you a tale of the desert. A man walked alone amongst the dunes and rocks, stumbling, ragged. He had been walking for many days. His skin was blistered and red, his lips chapped and cracking. His white beard matted with sand, and his eyes stared up at the heavens half mad with pleading. His name was Caleb, and he was a good man. Caleb was searching for his God. He had always felt the call of his God, and did his best to spend his days caring for the weak and needy, the poor and infirm. He was a priest of Loth, but unlike many priests of Loth, Caleb wore no rich silks. His old fingers did not flash with gold and rubies. His head was unadorned with either mitre or circlet. The rich men had come to him with their whispers of wealth and power, had sung the song of dreams come true, if only he would grant them a few favors. Caleb felt the pull. How many could he help with riches? How many lowly and begotten could he lift from the streets for the price of a few sins? Like so many of his order, the pull of temptation was great. Then the catalyst happened. Diamonds were discovered in a great vein underneath the tomb of the last priest king. The rich men, the merchants, they bought the land for a case of black pearls. In a day and a night, the tomb was devastated and destroyed, made into fragments of rubble and bone. The people wailed. The people cried out to the Empress to send her soldiers and stop this desecration. The people begged the priests in their silken robes to stop this. The tears, the angry yells over the rending of the sacred, it all fell on ears that might as well have been carved from stone. The imperial soldiers shrugged, for no law was broken. The glittering priests, who should be the most offended by this slight against their legacy, turned away into their luscious chambers. A cairn of stone was a small price to pay for the luxury and influence that they wielded. Caleb lay upon the stone there for a day and a night, as pickaxes hacked at the ancient stone and opened forgotten chambers in the earth. His outrage built, his desperation clawing at him. Was there nothing sacred in this world, or had all been ripped to shreds by the intoxication of gold and silver? He didn't remember when he left, when he started walking. He remembered tearing the bejeweled amulet from his slender neck and throwing it into the abyss where the tomb used to be. It had been a gift from the simpering merchants that had approached him, a preview of the riches to come. Taking it had been his greatest sin. Now, Caleb stumbled through the susurration of blowing sand. His voice had long grown raw and hoarse from screaming defiance at his God, from sobbing desperately for a sign that he was not alone. His cries finally came out silent, gasps, rasps, nothing left to him. This was when the sign came to him. It wasn't a voice, but more of a sound. The whispering winds slid the sand down around his ankles, and it said, "Come." Caleb came. The desert shushed around him, and tall peaks of ragged stone emerged from the sand like a mirage. It was a spot in the desert like any other, but Caleb began to dig. The throbbing sun grew low, and Caleb kept digging, first with his hands, then his arms, then his feet, until his fingers brushed something cold, like metal. A thrill shot through his body, the contact bringing him out of his haze and delirium. He pressed his face to the black material.
I am here, faithful servant. You come to me with a pure heart, and together we will lead them back to the path.
And so, Caleb pushed away the sand. He was no longer hungry. His belly felt as full as if he had just eaten the most lordly feast in the hall of the Empress. He was no longer thirsty. The burns on his arms and face cooled as if doused with spring water and disappeared. The sun went away and rose again, and when it returned, he saw what he had unearthed. It was a perfect cube of obsidian glass. The sun shimmered down razor-sharp edges and was drawn into the shimmering darkness. It reflected the desert like a mirror, and Caleb could see himself as he sat down to gaze upon it. He wept with joy. "Kaloth, it is you? I gaze upon your throne." The response blasted him, made him new and whole. By the time that Caleb returned, the riots had overtaken the city. Not just the city, as the voices had proclaimed. The desecration of the tomb of the last priest king had enraged anyone who held Kaloth sacred as a god of the empire. Even those who cared not for gods were filled with purpose. They stormed against the merchant lords in their lofty villas, they threw down their spades and their plows and refused to work. Even some priests of Loth had been held to account, ripped apart by the crowds with their jewels scattered to the wind. Caleb came like a guiding star. Kaleth had blessed him with ancient magic. The humble priest, in his robes of threadbare white, led the humble people against the corrupt and purchased lords. He came to the temple of Loth in Ishtaran, and when he reached out his hand against the purchased priests, they were torn asunder with a mighty sound and a rending of flesh. His ancient magics terrified the crowds with awe, and they knew that Kaloth was finally with them again. They ascended the 1,000 steps to the palace of the Empress. Caleb could see the unworthy, could scent the stink of unholy gold upon the lords and soldiers. He reached out his hand, and they were shattered by the power of Kaloth. The people followed him, chanting ancient hymns and murmuring prayers of redemption as Caleb spoke the ancient words and the holy lessons in a thundering voice. Caleb came before the Empress in her throne room. There was no place in all of the world more magnificent. The ceiling was so high that it might have been the sky. The columns were more rich with engravings and history than the most ancient library. The sun spilled through windows of colored glass that told the story of the empire in their panes. Small as she was, the Empress dwarfed them all. She was tan of skin, decorated with flowing tattoos of vines and plants. Her raiments were of silk spun with gold. Her crown gave the illusion of a sunspark halo around her head, but no gem could match the luster, no ore could match the glow of her eyes. They were almond-shaped and dark, heavy-lidded but sharp. Empress Tanai V, holy heir to the great throne of the Osirion Empire, shifted into a more comfortable position and crossed her legs. The barest tilt of her head and her glittering guards snapped their spears up and stepped out of the way. The mob behind Caleb suddenly realized what they had done by storming up these steps and quieted in reverence. Caleb threw himself on the ground before his Empress. People gasped and muttered. "Guardian of the Empire," the old man intoned. He could smell the smoke and the dust on his robes as he pressed his face to the ground. It wasn't him speaking, not really. Caleb was only a vessel. "Kaloth has come to me. It has seen the wickedness and deceit in the chambers of government, in the sacred halls of our temples, and it will burn it out. In this, we have no choice. It will happen, for it has chosen to save us from ourselves. Whether I, Caleb your priest, live or die, makes no difference. I beg your leave, O most sacred queen of the beloved, to be the instrument of the will of Kaloth." The grand chamber collapsed into the deepest silence. In the times of old great priest kings ruled the Osirion Empire. They ruled by the divine right of the gods which they spoke for. In this moment, Caleb could have torn the Empress asunder with his magics, could have taken the throne for himself. He did not. The Empress descended slowly, her gilded raiments trailing behind her. She knelt and took Caleb's face in her hands.
"Servant of the gods,"
she murmured. Somehow, her tones echoed through the chamber. Her words reached every ear of the 1,000 ragged people that had ascended the steps with Caleb.
"This is an empire of men. I will listen to the voice of the gods. but never will we kneel to it. Rise.
They came to their feet together.
Caleb, I name you the voice of Loth. Henceforth, all priests of your order must bend to your will, for you have the blessing of the throne. Use your name with honor and commit no sins against the Empire, the merchants, or the people. Go and mold your domain to the will of the gods.
Caleb did. Kaloth did. The priests of Loth were castigated, their riches and spices were scattered to the people until only servants remained. A great pilgrimage was made to the desert, and the worthy priests came upon the throne of Kaloth and touched it. A great and fearsome power was granted them, and they built a mighty temple around the obsidian cube. They held a great sway over the hearts of men, and their words echoed through the halls of merchants and governors, paupers and warriors. In this way, Kaloth came back into the world. Though the Empress kept her life and her domain, the governance was quickly overcome by the fervent priests of Loth, overcome and empowered by their restored connection to their god. Great warriors were forged from devoted slaves and restored criminals. They were the hands of Loth. They left their old minds behind and were taken to a sacred forge in the temple of Kaloth. There, great curved Kopesh swords and steel masks were infused with their blood and bonded to them. Kaloth reached through his priests and blessed his warriors, removing all pain and infusing them with supernatural strength and quickness. They took sashes of deepest red linen and sandals and breastplates of darkest black leather. There they touched the great cube of the throne of Kaloth and became reborn. In a storm of blood and a rush of horses' hooves, the empire was brought to unification. Cities which were barely governed became bastions and extensions of the empire. The merchants were consumed by the new order, organized and scheduled until the trade flowed more smoothly than it ever had. The people rejoiced at first until they realized that their lives and families were no longer their own. Kaloth was a god of the darkness. It thrived on the shadows, on the separation of all life. From the void between stars it came. From the emptiness before and after the universe it came. It hungered for the chaos, from the separation of life from itself. To send the tiny sparks of life flickering off into the infinite darkness was its only desire. It was trapped here, in this temple in the desert. Bound it was, by the Ancient Ones, in this cube of obsidian. Long did it wait, carefully did it weave its plans to escape from its prison and rend the hated living ones from their world. And the sun itself, a horrible pinprick of light and heat, intruding on blessed darkness. Well, soon it would quiet its noise, and the eternal void between stars would be at peace. The priests of Loth united their petty empire. They subjugated the disloyal and burned out the corruption. Blessed with power they were, blessed with destruction, with chaos, with the subjugation of all people. Blessed by a god that would destroy them.